I'll never forget the sound of my father's voice cutting across the crowded hall, the words dripping with condescension as dozens of relatives and old family friends turned to look at me. "She's just a Navy enlistee," he said, chuckling like it was some kind of joke. Forks paused halfway to mouths, champagne glasses froze midair, and all I could do was stand there with my plate balanced in one hand, feeling the sting of being reduced to a single dismissive label. Then came the moment that silenced the room. A younger cousin, scrolling on his phone, suddenly blurted out, "Damn! She's the SEAL who took down the terrorists." His voice cracked with awe, and every head in the room snapped back toward me. My father's jaw literally dropped, the smirk vanishing, his face pale as a ghost. That's when I realized this reunion wasn't going to unfold the way he had planned, or the way I had dreaded. The Collins family reunion had always been my father's domain, his stage, his spotlight. Every 2 years, he rented out the largest banquet room at the Lakeview Country Club, the kind of place with polished oak floors and chandeliers that sparkled just right in photos. For him, it wasn't really about family. It was about prestige, showing off, and reminding everyone in our extended circle where we stood in the hierarchy of success. Walking through those glass doors, I knew exactly what I was walking into. The long tables covered in white linen, the trays of shrimp cocktails and imported cheeses, the waiters in black vests moving like shadows across the room. It was all a performance. My father was a man who measured himself by appearances, and his reunions were annual proof that he was winning the game. I hadn't been home in 3 years. My deployments, my training, and, if I'm honest, my reluctance kept me away. Every time I came back stateside, I told myself I'd stop by, make an appearance, show my face. But somehow, there was always a reason not to, until this year. The invitation came printed on thick ivory cardstock, embossed in gold. A quiet statement that no expense had been spared. I almost threw it out. But then I thought of my mother, who always said, "Don't run from the things that hurt. Face them head on." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time. I had barely stepped inside when I saw him. My father, Gregory Collins, tall, silver hair slicked back, wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my entire dress uniform. He was standing near the head table, a drink in his hand, entertaining a group of businessmen like it was another board meeting instead of a family gathering. The way he spotted me was almost accidental, his eyes flicking over, his smile tightening, as if he'd just seen the person he least wanted to introduce. But he did it anyway. "Ah," he said, waving me over. "This is my daughter, Sarah. She's just a Navy enlistee." It wasn't the first time he had reduced me to that phrase. He said it the same way you'd introduce someone who worked at a gas station when everyone else in the room was a doctor or a lawyer. No mention of deployments. No mention of my rank. No mention of the sacrifices or the training. Just those 4 words, delivered with a half smirk. I forced a polite smile, shaking hands with people whose eyes glazed over the second they heard the word Navy. They shifted back to stories about their summer homes, their stock portfolios, their kids' Ivy League acceptances. I might as well have been invisible. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was used to it, that a decade of being underestimated had hardened me. But there's something about being dismissed in front of your own family that cuts deeper than any insult from a stranger. Then came the interruption. A cousin, one of the younger ones, maybe 17, was hunched over his phone, scrolling through headlines. He glanced up at me, then back at his screen, then back at me again. His eyes widened. "Wait," he said loudly, his voice breaking the chatter. "Isn't that her? She's the SEAL who took down those terrorists." The room fell into a hush. You could have heard the ice clink in someone's glass. A dozen phones appeared at once, relatives pulling up the same headline, the same grainy photo from the news. And suddenly, all eyes were on me. I stood frozen, heat creeping up my neck, as murmurs rippled across the room. "That's her? No way!" But Greg said, and my father just stared. His mouth hung open, his drink trembling slightly in his hand. For once, the man who always had the right words, the perfect quip, the rehearsed line for every occasion, had nothing. I didn't plan for this moment. I didn't even want it. But there it was, unfolding around me. The truth, too loud to be ignored. And all I could think was, this night is only just beginning. When I think about why that sentence, she's just a Navy enlistee, slices so cleanly, I have to walk backward through a house that always smelled like lemon polish and quiet disapproval. Our split level on Maple Ridge Lane could have been a catalog shoot. Brass banister gleaming, family portraits calibrated to suggest effortless success. A living room no one actually lived in except for Christmas morning photographs. My father used to stand with a hand on the fireplace mantel like it was a podium and say things that sounded like blessings, but were really blueprints. Prestige isn't a bad word. It's a direction. He'd smile at my older cousin's Yale pennant on the wall like it belonged to him. In that house, ambitions were curated. My father collected them the way other people collected art. He could tell you which summer programs put you on track for which scholarships, which internships opened which doors, which last names mattered at which clubs. He loved maps with thick paper and embossed covers, college brochures, career pathways, and he'd unfold them over the dinner table like battle plans. He didn't ask what we wanted. He asked where we saw ourselves strategically positioned in 5 years. If you answered wrong, he didn't yell. He sighed. A long, theatrical exhale that could turn a room cold. I was 15 when I joined JROTC. The flyer was tacked to a corkboard in a hallway that always smelled like gym socks and pencil shavings. The picture showed a girl in a pressed uniform, chin level, shoulders squared. There was a clarity in her eyes I envied. Not flashy or complicated, just aligned. I brought the form home and waited until after dinner, when the dishwasher hummed and my father's tie lay coiled like a serpent on the back of a chair. JROTS, he repeated, rolling the abbreviation around like a foreign word. Why? Because I like it, I said, too quickly, like an apology. Because I think I might be good at it. My mother pretended to stir something on the stove that had already been stirred, and the clock over the sink ticked with the patience of a judge. My father leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. You'll learn to march, he said. Fine, but promise me this is a phase. You have the mind for law, Sarah, or medicine. Command your life from the top, not from the ranks. I signed the form anyway. He didn't forbid it, he just detached, which, in our house, could feel colder than anger. The first time I wore the uniform to school, I felt like my spine had found a new setting. We learned to make beds so tight you could bounce a quarter, practiced facing movements until our calves burned, and called out cadence that turned scattered footsteps into one heartbeat. I liked the discipline, the small rituals that built something invisible and strong. I liked that excellence wasn't rhetorical. It was measurable. Time, distance, precision. When I came home with a ribbon for marksmanship, my father glanced up, smiled at the air, and asked if I'd registered for the SAT too. He had a way of making my accomplishments feel like detours. When my cousin Natalie got into Stanford, he opened a bottle of champagne with a pop you could hear from the garage. When I won a regional drill competition, he said, "That's nice," like I'd cleaned the gutters without being asked. Not that he was cruel. Cruelty requires engagement. He was invested in my trajectory the way an investor watches a chart, up or down, green or red. And JROTC felt red to him. Too enlisted adjacent. He liked officers in dress whites at galas. He didn't like the smell of Brasso on my fingers. There were bright spots. Chief Morales, our instructor, had a voice like gravel and a way of noticing when you were about to quit. He taught me how to break down a task until it couldn't intimidate you anymore. "You don't eat the mountain," he said, pacing the strip of asphalt we used as a parade deck. "You take a rock, then another rock." He taught me how to square a corner and how to hold a gaze just long enough to steady a room. And there was my mother's quiet counterpoint. She kept a shoebox of my ribbons and certificates beneath her bed like contraband. Some nights I'd find a sticky note on my door in her careful handwriting. Proud of you. Not because of the ribbon, because you kept showing up. The day I told my father I wanted the Navy after graduation, he set his fork down with surgical precision and folded his hands like we were negotiating. "The Navy," he said. "If you must serve, you'll join as an officer. ROTC scholarship. Finish a proper degree. There's a difference between leading and following." "Leaders are shaped by what they endure," I said, parroting something Chief had said about resilience. It sounded braver in my head than it did in our dining room. He frowned, not angry, calculating. "You'll take orders your whole life. You're wasting your mind." I think about that sometimes. The certainty with which people tell you what your life will be like because they're afraid of what it would mean if you chose a path they don't understand. Following, to him, was the opposite of winning. He couldn't imagine the following that happens in a stack going through a door. The wordless trust, the atomized plans that knit together in motion. He couldn't imagine the quiet leadership of the one who keeps showing up when it's cold and dark and no one is clapping. Senior year blurred into a set of thresholds. I got my ASVAB scores back and folded the paper into my wallet like a talisman. I spent weekends on the range, learned to love the rubbery smell of ear protection, the way breath and trigger pull could align like prayer. Chief introduced me to a guest speaker, a woman who'd done time as a Navy EOD tech, and when she shook my hand, I felt a current run up my arm. "Possible," that handshake said. "Don't wait for permission." At graduation, my father wore a smile that fit like a rented tux. He shook hands with guidance counselors like a man closing deals. When the principal announced my enlistment, light applause bubbled up from a corner of the bleachers occupied by JROTC parents who understood what it meant. My father clapped twice, the way you might for a pleasant opening act, and leaned in to whisper, "There's still time to switch tracks. I know people." I wanted to say, "I know people too. People who bleed and keep going." Instead, I said, "Thank you," because I wasn't ready to make a battlefield out of a gymnasium. I shipped not long after. The recruiter's office smelled like coffee gone bitter and carpet cleaner, fighting a losing war. The American flag in the corner was too bright to be anything but new. I signed forms that reduced the story of my life to black boxes and initials. My mother hugged me tight, her cheek damp against mine, and slipped a note into my palm. "Don't run from the things that hurt. Face them head on." My father shook my hand like I was a junior associate moving to a different department. "Make me proud," he said. And I thought, I will, but maybe not in a way you'll recognize. Boot camp stripped the noise away. The first morning, the lights came on at 04:30 with the force of noon, and an RDC's voice filled the compartment like thunder. We learned the choreography of urgency, where to stand, what to carry, how to move when your body wanted to bargain. Blisters bloomed, uniforms softened around the shoulders, and I discovered a gear I hadn't known I had. When I wrote home, I kept it factual. "We marched to cadence in the rain today. My rack is squared away. I passed my swim qual." My mother wrote back with careful lines about casseroles and weather, and how the cat had claimed my chair. My father wrote once, a short email about discipline being transferable capital. If he ever asked what I was aiming for beyond the Navy, I don't remember it. Ambition, for him, lived on org charts and brass plaques. Mine lived in mile repeats at dawn, and the quiet hum that fills your chest when a team moves like a single organism. I started hearing rumors about pipelines that sounded like myth, training that broke people down to whatever couldn't break. I didn't say the words out loud yet. Saying them felt like an invitation for someone to swat them away. On Sundays, when we got a sliver of time, I'd sit on a bench by the water and watch gulls ride the wind like they were part of it. The air tasted like salt and rust, and the horizon made promises it had no obligation to keep. I thought about maps, my father's thick paper, my mother's sticky notes, and realized I was making a different kind. Not a line from here to there, but a set of coordinates. Grit, patience, precision, quiet. A way to navigate by stars no one else could see. I didn't know then how far those coordinates would take me. I only knew I was done asking for someone else's permission to follow them. There's a difference between wanting something and choosing it. Wanting is daydreams and magazine clippings. Choosing is paperwork and sweat, bruises you don't mention, mornings when the alarm is still a rumor and you're already lacing up your boots. The day I raised my hand again and signed for the pipeline, it felt less like a decision and more like gravity. Everything that had been tugging at me, the cadence drills, the swim quals, the way my lungs seemed to quiet in cold water when others panicked, had been pointing here. SEAL training. The words carried a kind of taboo, especially when they slipped from the mouth of a woman. People tilted their heads, like maybe they'd misheard. Or they laughed it off, like a kid saying she'd be an astronaut. I learned to keep it to myself. Better to let the training do the talking. BUDS is 3 syllables that hide an ocean. Basic underwater demolition, SEAL. It starts in Coronado, where the Pacific is a cold you can't bargain with. The first day, we lined up in starched uniforms that wouldn't stay starched for long. Instructors circled us like wolves, voices sharp, eyes sharper. "This is the easy part," one said, grinning as we gasped through endless push-ups on sand so hot it seared our palms. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the strongest. But I had something stubborn in my marrow, the kind of refusal that grows when you've spent your whole life being told you're just something. Just a daughter, just enlisted, just not enough. Every time my muscles screamed, I pictured my father's dismissive half smile, and I pushed once more. The Pacific became both punishment and sanctuary. "Get wet and sandy," the instructors barked, and we'd sprint into the surf, roll until every inch of skin was coated, then line up like sugar-crusted statues. The cold gnawed your bones until your teeth chattered like castanets. I told myself each shiver was another layer of doubt leaving my body. Hell Week arrived like a storm you can't track on radar. 5.5 days, little sleep, miles of runs, boats carried on bruised shoulders. Log PT that ground even the strongest into dust. Men rang the bell in the middle of the compound. 3 strikes that meant they were done. Warm showers waiting. Every clang echoed inside my chest like a dare. There was one night, around hour 60, when I almost joined them. My hands were raw meat, my knees a map of purple and green, and the Pacific had crawled so far into my bones I thought I'd never be warm again. The instructors herded us into the surf zone, waves pounding like fists, water black as oil under a sky smeared with stars. I remember laying there, shoulder to shoulder with my boat crew, shivering so hard it felt like convulsions. "Cold!" one of the instructors shouted, walking the line. His teeth gleamed in a grin. "You think this is cold? You've got a choice. Quitting's warm." He tapped the bell with his baton, and the sound carried. A guy 2 bodies down, bolted upright, tears mixing with salt water, and ran for the bell. The clang rang out, then another. We were shrinking. I closed my eyes and thought of my mother's shoebox under the bed. Every ribbon, every note, every little scrap of proof that I was more than what my father allowed me to be. I thought about my father introducing me as just anything. I thought about never having the chance to show him that just could save lives. My teeth chattered a wordless cadence. Not done, not done. When dawn bled over the horizon, I was still there. We all looked like corpses washed ashore, but we were breathing. Weeks turned into months. We learned to dive until the ocean stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like another limb. We learned to shoot until muscle memory erased hesitation. We learned that leadership wasn't a rank pinned to your chest, but the moment you grabbed the heaviest end of the log without being told. I kept my family in the dark. Phone calls home were short, mostly to my mother. Training's tough, I'd say, but I'm fine. She never pressed for details. My father never asked. Once, in a rare email, he wrote, "Hope you're not wasting yourself on grunt work." I read it in the dim glow of a barracks light, laughed without humor, and deleted it. Graduation wasn't fireworks. It was quieter. We stood in formation, uniforms pressed, the trident pinned to my chest, cold metal that burned hotter than anything I'd ever worn. When it was over, I went back to my quarters, locked the door, and stared at that pin until my eyes blurred. I had crossed a threshold. But I didn't send a picture home. Didn't call my father. Some victories you keep for yourself, at least until the world drags them into the light. The teams became my family in a way I hadn't expected. There was Alvarez, who could make you laugh while your muscles screamed, and Chen, whose steady presence calmed storms. We were different pieces cut to fit the same machine. In the field, ego burned away. Only precision remained. And then came the deployment, the one that would tattoo itself into headlines and dinner table whispers, the one that would drag my name, reluctantly, unwillingly, into the spotlight. But that, as I would learn, was still waiting on the horizon. Some memories refuse to stay quiet. They come back in fragments. The smell of diesel mixed with sweat, the rasp of Velcro as you tighten your gear, the metallic click of a rifle bolt locking forward. They visit in dreams, sometimes blurred, sometimes sharp enough to wake you with your heart still pounding. For me, that mission lives like a scar beneath the skin. We were wheels up before dawn, the C-130 vibrating like an old washing machine under our boots. Inside, the red cabin lights painted everyone in the same muted hue. No names, no ranks, just shadows strapped in, waiting. I checked my kit 3 times, fingers tracing over every strap and buckle. My stomach had learned long ago not to flutter, but that morning, it wouldn't stop its low, steady churn. The intel brief had been clear. American engineers, 7 of them, were being held in a fortified compound in a remote valley. The captors were part of a well-armed cell with a record of brutality. The mission was textbook hostage rescue. Speed, violence of action, precision. But no mission ever stays inside the textbook. As the plane dipped, I thought about the engineers' families. Some had probably just gotten kids off to school when the news broke, not knowing if they'd ever hug them again. That thought anchored me more than any flag or doctrine. This wasn't about medals. It was about bringing people home. We hit ground under cover of night, the air thick with dust kicked up by the rotors. The valley was colder than I'd expected, the kind of chill that makes your breath bloom white, even under night vision. Moving through that terrain felt like walking on another planet. Jagged rocks, whispers of wind, the distant bark of a dog that knew more than it should. "Stack up!" our team leader whispered. The compound loomed ahead, high walls outlined in faint green glow. My spot was second in the stack, heartbeat sinking to the rhythm we drilled 1,000 times. Chen pressed the charge to the gate. Alvarez whispered something irreverent under his breath, as always. And then, the blast. A door that had stood for decades turned to splinters and dust. The next moments blurred into the kind of clarity only adrenaline can carve. We moved fast, slicing through corridors, the air thick with smoke and the metallic sting of gunpowder. Shouts in a language I only half understood echoed off concrete walls. I remember the heat of my rifle against my cheek, the way the sight picture steadied, as if my body knew the choreography before my mind could catch up. One of them appeared in the hallway. Tall, armed, eyes wide with the kind of fanatic fury that doesn't hesitate. He raised his weapon, but I was already moving. The recoil slammed into my shoulder once, twice. He fell, his body a rag doll against the wall. No time to think, no time to mark it. Keep moving. We found the hostages huddled in a back room, eyes wide, hands trembling. Their faces were pale, streaked with dirt and exhaustion. One of them whispered, "Are we going home?" And I almost choked on the lump that rose in my throat. "Yes," I said, Stay behind us. But the fight wasn't over. On our exfil route, the leader of the cell tried to ambush us. He was heavier than the others, scarred, carrying himself with the cruel confidence of someone used to being feared. His AK barked into the night, rounds sparking against stone. My ears rang, the world slowing to a tunnel. I don't remember deciding. I just remember closing distance, my weapon jamming after a bad magazine change, an instinct pulling me forward anyway. It became hands, elbows, knees, years of combatives boiling down to one violent knot of survival. His breath stank of hash and blood. He tried to wrestle me down, but I shifted, drove my weight into him, felt something give. My knife flashed in the moonlight, fast and final. He went still. When it ended, my chest was heaving, my arm slick with blood that wasn't all mine. My teammates' shouts echoed distantly, pulling me back into motion. The hostages were ushered out, stumbling into freedom they hadn't dared imagine an hour earlier. We lifted out under fire, tracers carving angry lines through the dark sky. The birds shuddered as we climbed, but no one spoke. The hostages clung to each other, wide-eyed, half-believing. Alvarez pressed a bandage against my arm, muttering, "Always gotta make it dramatic, huh?" I laughed, the sound raw. Back at base, the debrief was clinical. Casualties. Enemy combatants, confirmed dead. Friendly forces, all accounted for. Hostages, alive, shaken, safe. Mission, success. But the word success felt too small. The headlines broke weeks later. Grainy footage leaked, blurred faces, a line in bold, American SEAL team foils hostage crisis. Analysts speculated about tactics, about who had been on the ground. They didn't name me. They rarely do. But whispers spread anyway. Enough that when my cousin at the reunion held up his phone, there was no mistaking the silhouette, the movement. Enough to make people connect the dots. At the time, I tucked it away. Another mission, another scar only the teams understood. I didn't tell my father. Didn't tell anyone. It was mine to carry. But that night in the compound, under the choking dust and the roar of gunfire, something inside me shifted. I stopped being just anything. I knew it, even if my father never would. Or so I thought. It was strange how quickly silence could spread through a room meant for laughter. 1 minute, the Collins family reunion buzzed with small talk. Silver-haired aunts comparing grandkids, uncles clinking glasses, cousins bragging about internships. The next, after my cousin's outburst, the air thickened like a church right after a preacher calls for confession. "Damn! She's the SEAL who took down the terrorists." The words hung there, suspended like smoke, impossible to unhear. Phones lit up across the hall, screens tilted toward each other, fingers swiping through news feeds, heads lifting to sneak glances at me. I stood frozen, my plate of roast beef and potato salad suddenly absurd in my hands. Somewhere behind me, a glass clinked against the floor. Faint, accidental, but it jolted everyone back into motion. Whispering rose like the rustle of dry leaves. "Is that true?" an aunt murmured. "Her? Greg said she was just enlisted. That's her silhouette in the footage, isn't it?" My father didn't move. He just stared, his jaw slack, his drink trembling so slightly I thought maybe I was imagining it. The smirk he'd worn a moment before had drained, replaced by something brittle. Shock, maybe, or fear. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. What are they talking about?" Before I could answer, another cousin shoved his phone toward him. On the screen, a grainy clip played. Figures in night vision green, a silhouette tackling a man twice her size, a knife flashing before the image cut away. My father's face tightened as though the pixels had reached out and struck him. "That's classified," I said quietly, my voice steadier than my pulse. "You're not supposed to see that." But it was too late. The genie was out, dancing in headlines and whispers. Guests began to circle, questions fired at me from every direction. Was that really you? Did you save those engineers? Did you kill him? I deflected what I could. Hostages made it home safe. My team did our job. I can't discuss details, but the more I said nothing, the more their imaginations filled the gaps. In their eyes, I wasn't the invisible cousin anymore. I was something dangerous, exotic, suddenly worth crowding around. And my father, the man who had introduced me moments earlier as just a Navy enlistee, now looked like a magician whose trick had backfired. His entire persona was built on control, on shaping narratives. Now the narrative was shaping him. "Greg," one of his business partners said, a portly man in a seersucker suit, "you never told us your daughter was a Navy SEAL." He opened his mouth, closed it. His lips moved, but nothing came out. For once, Gregory Collins, master of speeches, of toasts and introductions, had no script. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I felt exposed. Every bruise, every scar, every long night of training I'd carried quietly had been dragged into the chandelier light of this banquet hall. And while part of me relished watching my father squirm, another part ached with the weight of it. This wasn't how I wanted my work to be acknowledged. "Sarah," Aunt Louise said softly, her pearls gleaming under the lights, "why didn't you tell us?" I swallowed, the potato salad on my plate congealing untouched. "Because it wasn't about telling you," I said. "It was about doing it." Across the room, my cousin's phone replayed the clip again, the flash of the knife catching the collective imagination. The whispers grew louder, blending into a single hum of astonishment. And then I saw him, my father, still rooted to the same spot, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers. It hit the parquet floor, shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Gasps followed, head swiveling. He didn't even bend to pick it up. He just stared at me, pale, jaw working like a man trying to swallow something far too big. "Is it true?" he asked again, voice rough. You killed a man?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was something smaller, sadder, like he was trying to reconcile the daughter who once wore pigtails and skinned her knees with the soldier who had wrestled death in a desert night. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I set my plate down on the nearest table and stood taller. Around us, relatives whispered, business associates gawked, cousins nudged each other with newfound awe. But between my father and me, the room seemed to shrink to silence. "You told them I was just an enlistee," I said quietly. "Was that easier for you?" His face twitched, shame and pride warring under his skin. He glanced at the circle of watching eyes, then back at me, his mouth opening to reply. But no words came. The silence stretched, brittle as glass. I could feel it, the fracture line that had run through our family for years widening into something impossible to ignore. And I realized in that moment, the reunion wasn't just about food and family. It was about exposure, about the truth, raw and unfiltered, forcing itself into the open. The trickle had become a flood, and none of us could go back. The party limped along after that, but the air had shifted. Conversations that once hummed with gossip about stock tips and real estate deals now stuttered, caught on the grit of what had been revealed. Guests cast furtive glances toward me, then toward my father, as though watching a play they hadn't realized was a tragedy. I tried to retreat to the buffet, to hide in the neutral territory of shrimp cocktail and cold ham slices, but my father intercepted me near the bar. He moved fast for a man his age, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood. He grabbed my elbow, not hard, but firm enough to make his point. "Come with me," he muttered. His voice wasn't the smooth baritone he used for speeches. It was lower, rougher, the edge of a man stripped of his armor. He led me down a short hallway toward one of the smaller meeting rooms the country club rented out. Empty, dark, but for the faint light of a single lamp. When the door clicked shut, the murmurs of the reunion faded into silence, replaced only by the shallow sound of our breathing. He turned on me then, the mask gone. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. The weight of decades sat in his shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked. "Why did I have to find out like that, from a phone screen?" I crossed my arms, leaning back against the table, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Would you have listened?" He flinched as though I'd struck him. "Of course I would have listened. I'm your father." I let out a sharp laugh. Not cruel, just bitter. "You've spent years introducing me as just a Navy enlistee. You reduced everything I've done, everything I've survived, into 4 words. You didn't want to know. You wanted me to fit into your little boxes. Lawyer, banker, something you could brag about at these reunions." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at his hands, knuckles white. For once, he didn't fire back. "I thought," he started, his voice faltering. He took a breath, steadied himself. "I thought if I minimized it, if I made it small, maybe it would be safer." That startled me. "Safer?" His eyes lifted to mine. No arrogance, no smugness, just something raw. "You're my daughter, Sarah. My only one. I couldn't stand the thought of you out there, risking your life in ways I couldn't even picture. Do you know what it's like to imagine your child in combat? To wake up at night wondering if someone in uniform will show up at your door? I thought if I made it sound unimportant, if I treated it like a phase, maybe it would be easier to believe you'd come home in one piece." The words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd carried the anger of his dismissal like a stone in my chest. I never considered that underneath his scorn there might be fear. "You hid your fear behind contempt," I said softly. "Yes." He pressed a hand to his mouth, then dropped it. "Because fear makes you look weak, and weakness has never served me well." I stared at him. At this man who'd spent his whole life playing king at a table built on appearances. For the first time, I saw not the king, but the man behind him, aging, frightened, unsure. "I didn't need your fear," I said, my throat tight. "I needed your belief. I didn't need you to brag. I just needed you to see me." He sank into a chair, his posture collapsing. "I didn't know how." His voice was a whisper now. "You were always braver than I was willing to admit, and I was ashamed of how much it scared me." Silence pressed down between us. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses from the party down the hall, a reminder that life was still going on while we wrestled with years of unspoken truths. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. "All of it? The pain, the risk, the killing?" I thought about it. The endless miles, the bruises, the faces of teammates who hadn't come home, the eyes of the man I'd fought in that desert. Then I thought about the hostages, the way they clung to each other when we pulled them free, the weight of lives balanced against my scars. "No," I said, "I regret nothing, because every choice I made was mine, and that's what matters." He looked at me, his eyes glistening, and for a moment I thought he might apologize. But he didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "I don't know if I can ever make this right." I pushed away from the table, standing tall. "Maybe you can't, but at least now you know who I am. That's a start." For the first time in my life, I saw him nod. Not dismissively, not condescendingly, but in recognition.